your speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about Mike Nichols.
Yeah, because Mike, Nichols and me, they were a famous duo. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he used it all the time. And I remember he was talking to his cinematographer at the edge of the pool in The Graduate, where so much of it took place, and I was lying in the water looking up like that, and he was talking about how they'd shoot it, put a guy in the water shooting up and down here, and he was talking about it, and I walked over because I was wondering how he would do this, and he was talking to his cinematographer, and then he sensed that I was there, and he said, "What?" And I said, "I just want to see how you're going to shoot this." He said, "Why is he attacking me?" So that's him.
That's great. So you famously played John Adams many times.
Many times.
First on stage in 1776.
Yes.
Then in the film 1776.
That's right.
You actually recreated the role in a TV movie called The Rebels. What did you enjoy about playing John Adams?
Well, the way it was introduced, in front of a closed curtain, you, as John Adams, you stepped out in front, and you started, and they're wrestling their programs and getting settled in their seats, and you would just insist that they listen to you. I don't know how else to put it. And with that, and then you could hear a pin drop, you felt like you owned the stage, and you could do no wrong. It was all, whatever you did was right for John Adams. And that was such a freedom and such a sense of power that it was a very attractive part for me to play for a long time, which I did. But that's the way that came about. And, it was a well-done play. I mean, it was well written. Peter Stone took this script and made it better, much better than it was at the beginning. And I don't know, I enjoyed it. It was hard because he never really left the stage, He had 9 musical numbers, and
tell them about the first time you heard when you went into rehearsal.
Oh, I didn't know what we had really. We were in Korea where we shouldn't have been, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to flop. I mean, it's just all a matter of flag waving, and as a matter of fact, the flag waving helped it a great deal, particularly when we went to Washington, where I really realized we had something going here, because all the politicos came out to see it and stood up and cheered, and God almighty. Anyway, what was it on?
Just the first time that you heard the...
Oh, yeah. So you open, and say, 1 man is a disgrace. 2, make a law for him. And 3 or more, make a Congress. And by God, I've had this Congress. And suddenly, this is the first rehearsal, all these voices came in, all singers, and wow, I thought, holy mackerel, I think we've got something here.
What were they singing?
Huh?
What were they singing?
Sit down, John. Sit down, John. For God's sake, John, sit down. I thought, oh boy, that sounds pretty good. That's when I thought maybe we had something, because I asked backwards into everything. I think nothing's going to work and all of that. But this convinced me with those voices, and they were all singers. So it was a wonderful experience for me to play that role. It really was.
Well, you were wonderful in it.
Oh, thank you.
In 1976, you actually played John Quincy Adams.
Yes.
John Adams' son. So how did that come about? Do you remember?
They just asked you.
They just asked you.
Yeah.
What was it like playing the son?
I can't recall, to tell you the truth. We're going back quite a...
Yeah.
You're
Absolutely.
very old. You had to play very old.
Oh, Oh my God, yes. In the middle of this, shooting this, I got an attack of appendicitis, and I went home. I didn't want to go into Bellevue or any of those places. I got on a plane and went home. The doctor met me and dragged me in and put me on a table. Immediately, he said, "Why did you do this? It could have burst, you know, appendix." So when I went back, I was very weak, and they had a bed in the back for me to lie down in. But it worked very well because I was playing this old man. And I just used the way I was feeling at the time to play him. So that worked out pretty well.
Sometimes those things work. Right?
That's right.
I wanted to touch on a few of your TV roles in
Yes.
the 70s. In 1974, you were in a TV movie called A Case of Rape.
Yes.
And that was a very important TV movie at the time. It touched on a very sensitive subject.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about that?
With
Elizabeth Montgomery.
with Liz Montgomery, and all I remember about it is playing this lawyer and having a very long speech before the jury, you know, and all of that. And but I was able to get through it, and I don't think we did any takes or anything like that. But it was a show about something that I don't think they had seen before, and so it was kind of controversial, and it also was of interest to people. Excuse me, because they just didn't in those days talk about that sort of thing. So and Liz Montgomery was very good in it, and it turned out very well. I was pleased with it.
In the mid 70s, you did a couple episodes of the TV series McCloud, which was produced by Glenn Larson.
Yes.
Do you have any recollections of those shows?
McCloud was
Bernadette Peters.
huh?
Bernadette Peters.
Bernadette Peters was.
The day that
oh
New York turned blue.
oh yeah. We had a scene together, she and I, a scene of misidentities. I thought she was a hooker and she wasn't, or something like that, and we had a couple of funny scenes to play together. And McCloud was, who was that, honey?
Glenn Larson.
Dennis Weaver was McCloud.
Dennis Weaver, and that's what I remember most about it. But was Bernadette, and we were pretty funny in it. Actually, it was a funny scene, and so it was pleasant to do. And I guess I did a couple of those at that time.
And is that how Glenn Larson
I think
thought
so.
of you for Knight Rider?
Yes, I think so. I think so. He. Well, I think you know about that. You know, he called me and you want me to repeat that?
Yeah, because we didn't talk about that on camera. So you,
Okay.
you can talk about that.
He called me and said, "Bill, I'm going to take a few pages to New York to pitch for a show, and I wondered if you'd do me a favor and come over to Universal and put it down on tape, and I can take that with me." So I said, "Sure," and I went over. I didn't know what it was, and he handed me this, and I looked at it, and I said, "This is a car?" "Uh-huh. And it talks." "Okay." So I started reading it, and he said, "How about making it like, like a voice like Ma Bell?" I said, "No." I started a little bit more. "How about doing it like a robot?" I said, "Would you just please let me read the thing?" And I just read it in my voice, and that was all. 3 weeks later, he calls me and said, "Listen, we sold this, and we might like you to do it." I said, "Well, you know, I'm doing St. El's Voice." He said, "We know that. It's the same network. We'll work it out." So my agent said, "Bill, you can't turn that down. I mean, they're going to work around you." So that's what we did, and with that, I'd go in there and knock it off in maybe 50 minutes a show, And I remember Jim, Garner? No. Who was the
David
guy?
Hasselhoff?
David Hasselhoff.
David
Yeah,
Hasselhoff.
Hasselhoff, meeting him at the Christmas party, and he said, "You son of a gun, how long does it take you to do that?" I said, "About 15 minutes." He said, "Well, I'm out there on the road in the desert, sweating." He said, "And it works, you know. Some lady reads your lines, but later we put them together and it seems to work." And I said, "Yes, I guess it did." Yeah, but I felt fortunate not to be out there with him, just going over and doing it at a recording studio at Universal. So it went on for a while. It was very nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
In 1975, you were on an episode of the Bob Newhart Show. What do you recall about that?
I recall that, and I can't. I had a line about these big dogs. He thought it was so funny about these big dogs that I had that he kept giggling, and even when we shot it, we had to do it over and over again because every time I said it to him, he'd just break up and start giggling again. Yeah, it was very funny, but it was a funny line about these dogs. And no, he was a great guy. He really was. I mean, is. He's not dead. He is. And I enjoyed doing the show with him. Oh, gosh.
In 1976, you were cast on the Nancy Walker Show.
Oh, yes.
What was that experience like?
Well, of course, I admired her work in New York. You know, she was a wonderful comedian. But in this particular case, she didn't want to be a comedian, and she wanted to be a leading lady with a husband and a romance between the two and so forth. And so I got involved in that. However, that didn't really work. I mean, everybody was expecting something else from her than she was doing. I'm not blaming her. We both went down together. I mean, it didn't last, you know. But she was a joy and had us over for dinner and things like that with her husband, David Craig. And it was a shame, but it didn't work out, you know.
Did you work closely with Norman Lear and Rod Parker? No?
With Norman Lear?
Norman Lear, yeah.
He produced it.
Huh?
He produced it.
Oh, he
Norman
did?
produced
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
No, I worked with Norman Lear on something else,
Yeah.
though.
I don't know what
I'm
it
not
was.
sure.
Oh, yeah, okay.
We knew it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In 1979, you were on the TV miniseries Blind Ambition, and you played G. Gordon Liddy.
Yeah.
What's your recollection of that experience?
We're talking 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, it was during
right?
Watergate.
What does that mean? Oh, yeah. G. Gordon Liddy was a maniac, you know. I mean, he put his hand on a flame, and they wrote that in. Well, I didn't go anywhere. I put my hand, but not anywhere near the way he did on this flame. And I played him. It was okay. I don't remember much about it. I do remember that flame and not going anywhere near it. But that's what he did. And he was kind of notorious at that time. And this part was a notorious part. But that's fine. I enjoyed playing it. Yeah.
In 1982, you started playing Dr. Mark Craig on Sane
yes.
Elsewhere.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
Bruce Paltrow was the producer of it, and he did something that I never had before. He sent me 5 scripts, and I remember he was up in San Francisco finishing up a film, and he called me, and I read the scripts, 5 of them, and the writing was wonderful. The part was small, and so, but it was a big cast. And he called me, he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, they're wonderful scripts, Bruce, but you know, it's a rather small part." And he said, "Billy, when they see what you do with it, the writers will write for you, believe me." So I said, "Okay." So we did them, and pretty soon that's what happened. They wrote for me. They brought Bonnie on the show. That was a funny bit with her. I had made a big thing over while I was operating, saying how I stopped my wife from smoking. I got out in front of the lawn and I yelled, "My wife smokes and I think she's going to kill us," and I went on and on about that. And I said, she stopped smoking. And I'm operating. Next scene we see, we're at a table where they're honoring the Surgeon of the Year, which I always thought I would get and never did. And I got up and went to the men's room, and she pulled out a cigarette and lit it up, and that was the joke. He just didn't know what he was doing there. But I enjoyed Dr. Craig. I really did. He was like me in many ways.
In what ways?
Oh, temper. I don't know how to explain it. You know, he ran the course of being angry one minute and nice the next minute, and I'm the same way. And it was a pleasure to do it because it just seemed to fit my temperament perfectly, you know. You know.
Were you looking to do a TV series at that time? Was that something you wanted to do?
No, I hadn't thought about it, you know. Just it came along, and it was an offer. I didn't even have to go in and take a meeting with them. They just offered it to me, and it turned out to be what he said it would be, which was that it became a rather prominent part in the overall show. But we had a large, wonderful cast: Denzel Washington and all kinds of people, and all kinds of people coming in and doing guest shots on it because they loved the show. And it was a great experience. It really was.
Do you have any memories of shooting the pilot
Of
St. Elsewhere? Because there were a lot of changes that were made after the initial
oh,
pilot
yes,
was shot.
yes. Now let me think a minute.
They changed the director.
Yeah, they changed the director. They changed the set. The set was too bright and sparkly, and he wanted a rundown hospital in a poor part of poor section of Boston, and we did the show, and then what was it, Bonnie? About 3 weeks later, we went back and redid a whole bunch of stuff, and a new director, a new few very important parts were changed, and actors different.
Ed Flanders was brought in.
Ed Flanders was brought in, and he was just wonderful in it, and we did that, and suddenly it was what it should have been, and then it was, you know, it ran what, 6 or 7 seasons.
6.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually canceled at the end of the first season,
It
right? So
was.
how did you find out that it had been renewed?
Oh, yes. It was canceled after the first year, and Bonnie and I went to Europe, and we were in Italy or someplace like that, and I was calling home, and my son, who was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old,
No,
maybe.
older.
Older?
He was in high school.
He was in high school, okay. And we had a long conversation, and the show had been canceled. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Oh, by the way, Dad, your show has been picked up." I said, "What?" He said, "Your show has been picked up." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Well, I didn't think." He didn't know. And that's how I found out that we're going to do a second season. And it was Grant Tinker who said, you know, it was canceled, and he said he uncanceled it and said, "We're going to do another season." And we wound up doing 6 or 7 seasons.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about preparing for that role as a doctor. Did you do a lot of research?
I went with a guy who was a surgeon. They arranged that I meet him, and he was very strange. um, I followed him around and into the operating room and stood in the balcony looking down, and him describing to me what they were doing to this child, which is open heart surgery. And, you know, he was a nut. I mean, he just, you know, he bragged about being late, and he went right through the gate, broke the gate down, because the nurse, the head nurse, if he wasn't there on time, they would give him his operating room away from him. So he did, and he was telling me about this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's strange. And we were there and we watched this operation, which was very interesting for me, because what happens is they start, there's the child, and naked chest, and they'll drape it this way, this way, this way, this way, and then you go to there, and then they'll drape it a little further and a little further, and pretty soon it's down to exactly where it's going to be, and so it's like dehumanized. You don't really think about that as part of the whole body. And I think that's the way they can get over doing this kind of thing, you know, that's a heart that they're dealing with, you know. And that was very interesting to me. And he watched a little while, and the kid was maybe 8 or 9, I think, the patient. And as he left, he said, he'll be dead by 14 or 15, and he walked out. And I thought, what kind of insensitivity is that? But he said that surgeons are plumbers, and that's the way he called them, plumbers. Just, you know, totally removed from any kind of personal relationship with the patient or anything like that. It's just what they do.
Did you use what you learned during that time with him?
Some of it, yes, some of it, but it didn't serve the part that well. So, you know, you got to be careful of what you're going to use and what you can't use. First of all, what you've got to do is meet the requirements of the script. Never mind what you saw in reality. This is the script, and this is the problem in the script, and that's what you have to answer. You can't, you know. So doing research sometimes can be misleading unless it absolutely pertains to what you have to accomplish in the script. And that's something that I've always kind of remembered.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had to do a lot of medical jargon.
Oh, God, yes.
What was that like as an actor?
Oh, boy, oh, boy. That was like, it was hard, actually. And you had to, I had to go out and sit out at my home out by the pool and really learn it cold before I got in there, because there's a lot going on and you got to know those lines perfectly, and some of them are very medical terms and so forth. So you really, so that you can just knock it off like he does it every day, you know. Not that it would be hard, that it would be for an actor who didn't prepare for it, you see. So that took preparation, but I did it, and it turned out all right. And he had some funny lines. I remember one. We had an Indian accent of India playing a role of an assistant or something like that, and he was the guy who takes care of the blood and the flow of the blood. Yes, anesthesiologist. And, you know, he had this line. He was overdoing it, and I looked at him and I said, "Where were you when they killed Indira Gandhi?" And I thought that was a pretty funny line. But that was a Dr. Craig line. He had those kind of lines. I loved that part.
Did you have input with the writers on the role at all?
Did I what?
Did you have input with the writers on the role?
No, they did it. In fact, you never saw them, you know. They stayed away. They just did it. I later became very close to Tom Fontana, who was one of the writers. But Bruce Paltrow kept it. They did their thing, and we did our thing down here. And it wasn't until much later that I got to know Tom, and he's a close friend now. But yeah, that's the way it worked. They didn't interfere with the actors, and the actors didn't interfere with them. And you didn't want to go up there and ask the producer, Bruce Paltrow, if I can have some more lines or something like that. He'd have your head. I never did that.
Did they ever give you anything that you disagreed with, that you didn't want to do?
Yes. After he left, the writers came in, new writers, and suddenly there I was. What was that?
A sheep?
A sheep, playing to a sheep down there with it like I was in love with it. I just, and we were in our 6th season or something like that. All the original writers have already gone, and I said, I don't want to do this. And then, this writer came down and started yelling at me, and I was going to do it anyway, but he took me seriously, and he was very new, and he started yelling at me, and I said, when he's out of here, I'll be in my dressing room, and we won't shoot anything until he's out of here. And I never did that before, but he shouldn't have been like that. And later, we made up. Anyway.
How about the original show creators, Josh Brand and John Falsey? Did you work with them closely?
No, they weren't in it that long. It seems to me they were only in it a season or 2, Bonnie? How?
Not even that.
Not even that. They left.
Something happened there. They were.
I don't know what happened there. Yeah. They just disappeared one time, and nobody would share that with you anyway. Certainly Bruce wouldn't allow that. That was business from upstairs, and that's where it stayed. Mm-hmm. At the office.
Right. The show is famous for its walk and talks.
Yes.
Talk about shooting those.
Yeah, it was one of the first that did a lot of that, and it did a lot, and it worked well for a hospital, where a lot of it is walking from stage to patient to patient, and here and there, and it was a challenge for the camera crew, who had to move that camera and keep it, straight and not wiggly and all of that. So we would have to do it maybe several times for their sake, because some of it was around the corner and things like that, or through a doorway, and it gave the show a nicer movement, which was important for the show. But sometimes they needed some practice at it, and we'd have to do it a couple of times before we get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were several regular directors on the series. Executive producers Mark Tinker and Bruce Paltrow directed a lot, and Eric Loneville, who starred in the show with you, he directed. Eric Loneville.
Oh, yes.
He directed a lot.
Sure.
What do you like in a director?
Well, and from my point of view, it's best if they do not ever read me a line. You don't do that. It's bad directing, and it's something that I don't want to hear. And so I think that was pretty clear on that show, that they didn't do that. But what they can do is set up the scene for you of what else is happening and how you fit into it. That's fine. And that's what happened there. There was no director that I remember ever directing me so close that they would be telling me line readings or things like that, because that's not a good directing. No, they have to get the actor who's right for the part, and then they have to let the actor do his work. You do your work, he does his work, and that's the way it should go.
I wanted to ask about a few specific cast members.
Sure.
So Ed Begley Jr. played Victor Ehrlich, Dr. Victor Ehrlich. You both had, as you said, kind of smaller roles when you started and became very important lead characters in the show.
Yes.
So talk about how those two characters' interaction maybe helped those roles expand.
Well, I loved Ed, and he loved me, but he was the kind that would come to a scene and not know the lines. And I always knew my lines. So I'd say, Ed, whenever would you like to go and learn them while I'm here with all this paraphernalia on? And, you know, I'd kid with him that way. And it was sort of a Mutt and Jeff and a father and son, really, with Ed. And we loved each other. We got along fine. But I would tease him that way because he was of the opinion that you pick up the lines in rehearsal, and I was of the opinion that you knew your lines to going into the rehearsal, and so I had that fun with him. Oh, you know, whenever you're ready, Ed, would you like to go off and learn the lines? I'll wait for you here, that kind of thing.
And what was the relationship between the characters like, between Ehrlich and Craig?
How do you mean, the relationship in the scripts?
Yeah, how those two characters interacted with each other.
Yes, well, just like that. I mean, they picked up on that, and you know, you treated him like a kid or a beginner or something like that. You lorded it over him a little bit, and he took it, and I don't know, it somehow worked, you know, and they worked it out rather nicely. And so we were at it for all of that time of run of the show. Yeah.
Talk about working with Ed Flanders as Dr. Westphal.
Well, Ed was a joy to work with. I have to tell you, he was, you know, one of the signs of a good actor is a good listener. Never mind that they're thinking about their lines or they stop thinking after they say their lines, that they listen. And so you're playing very well. And Ed was that way. He was a wonderful listener. And he had a certain maturity in the role that led to a certain gravitas and so forth. He was very good in the role. And I don't want to go into anything more on that.
Okay. What about Norman Lloyd? Talk about working with Norman Lloyd.
Norman was a joy. You know, he was the old man of and he's still the old man. I've met him for lunch over there where he lives on the other side of the hill, and he just is, well, he's wonderful to be around because he goes back to Orson Welles and all of those people in the 30s when he was a young man. And stories, he has a million interesting stories about Wells and about Chaplin, a good friend of Charles Chaplin. And we all just loved sitting around listening to some of his stories from the 30s when he was working with those people, those wonderful people. Yeah, he just great. He still is. I had lunch with him maybe a month or two ago, and he's fine.
Talk about Howie Mandel as Dr. Wayne Fiscus.
Well, let me see. Howie was a very good actor and was very good in the part. It turns out that his real wishes and talent was even more so for stand-up, and he went on to do a lot of stand-up. but he was a very good actor in the show. And, you know, he had a lot to do, and he and oh, I don't know, Denzel and all those character actors, Eric Launaville, they all got their chance to carry a show, you know, because they used to do that kind of thing. So he was funny, and but he was also serious as an actor, and he was good. He wasn't just a comic. Yeah.
And what about David Morse as Dr. Jack Morrison?
Oh yes. Well, David was a very serious person and very good actor, and he had a certain vulnerability that was very attractive in the role, and had it in himself. And he, I think this was his first big break, St. Elsewhere, and he was with the show all the way, and easy to work with, and sometimes, you know, it's such a big cast that sometimes you didn't see some of them for the longest time because you were on one storyline and they were on another storyline, and that happened sometimes with David. Yeah.
How about Christina Pickles as Dr. Helen Rosenthal?
Well,
Sorry, Nurse Helen
yeah,
Rosenthal.
she was very professional, very prepared, and did it very well. You know, because she had to have that hard edge that she had, and she did that good. And I don't know, she was terrific. You know, I loved them all. I mean, it was really an ideal show to be in. You didn't have, I was not aware of any problems of one actor with another, or one actor getting more than the other, or any of that stuff. They all were just happy to be on the show because everybody loved the show. Yeah.
What about working with Denzel Washington at that time?
Who knew what was going to happen with Denzel, you know? He was there with Eric Launaville, and I remember they were standing off stage one time in the back, kind of in the dark, and they were talking, and I walked by, and they said, "Here comes Whitey." They were kidding me. They were just happy to be on the show, and they did their jobs beautifully. And Denzel went on with that Spike Lee, is that his name?
Yeah.
Gave him a big break in features, and he went on to become quite a big star.
Absolutely. One last person in the cast we wanted to ask about is Mark Harmon as Dr. Robert Caldwell.
I don't know what to say. He was great. Yeah, I mean, he was always there, always prepared, and did a lovely job. That was before he went on to do his own show, and I think that part led him into the next show, which is what happens when you're doing something that the show is successful and that you're doing your job well. It could lead to something else, and that's happened with Mark. Right. Yeah.
We're going to talk about your most important co-star, Bonnie, when we have the two of you together. We're not going to talk about her right now. She'll be watching while you...
Oh. Okay.
So did you start to get recognized by people once St. Elsewhere was on?
Oh, sure. You know. Yeah. Maybe even before that. What was it? Oh, no, that was Feeney. Yeah. Hey, Feeney, yeah. Or I remember walking down 46th Street in New York, and a bus load of kids got off the bus, and they saw me, and they said, "Feeney!" And they all came. I ran around the block and disappeared all the way around the block because they were coming. The whole bus was coming at me. "Mr. Feeney!" In fact, Lin-Manuel did that over the phone. "Mr. Feeney!" The business is funny.
What do you think was so appealing to audiences about St. Elsewhere?
good scripts, interesting characters, and I think it was bedded in a kind of reality of a real hospital, not one of these shiny Dr. Kildare type shows, but a nitty-gritty hospital that you're liable to wind up in a poorer section of Boston. And I remember when we did the show, and Bruce was in London doing something else, and he came back and he started all over again because it had a sparkly look, absolutely clean and everything, and he didn't want that. Where they put in a sealant to dark it up, and he got a new camera crew, he got a couple of new actors, and he just pulled it all together. And then we had something.
Humor.
What?
It had humor.
The show had humor.
Yes, yes, the show did have humor, and that kind of thing is rare and didn't really happen in some of the other hospital shows who just were hospital shows. But this had a lot of humor in it, and I think that pays. You know, you got to have some humor in any of it to keep it attractive and break up the drama without, you know, losing it. But nevertheless, it's a great relief to have something different in it that breaks up the seriousness of it with some few laughs. That never hurt.
Definitely. Do you have a favorite episode or storyline?
I can't think of any. Can you, Bon? No,
No? Okay.
I can't.
The show obviously has a very famous finale.
Yes.
So what do you remember your thoughts the first time you read that finale script?
I wasn't happy with it.
Why not?
I don't remember. I forget now. It was a strange ending. But I forget. I wasn't in it. And I can't remember it exactly. We're talking like quite a few years ago now, and I can't remember. But I don't think I found it very satisfying ending.
How did you feel? You know, the ending being the interpretation of the ending is that it's all
A
in,
dream.
in a dream.
Yes, which I found unnecessary, really. I didn't care for the ending,
Yeah.
really.
You won 2 Emmy Awards
Yeah.
for the show. What did those honors mean to you?
Well, I don't know. They sent a limo for me, and I got in, and we got onto the 101, and the limo broke down. And I thought, oh boy. So Bonnie was in a gown, and I got out, and I walked home. And she stayed with the, what are you doing?
You want to pull the shirt
I don't know
down?
what you're doing, Bonnie.
Do you want to pull the shirt down?
What?
Pull your shirt down.
Just pull your shirt down a little.
Pull my shirt down. Okay. I walked home, got out of that, and I watched McEnroe play some tennis. He was playing in the finals, and she came home with a new limo, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm watching McEnroe play. It's, you know, I'm a big McEnroe fan." She said, I got all dressed up, and she started yelling at me, "Oh, all right, all right, all right, I'll get back in the monkey suit." And I got back in, and I think, you know, so we get there very late, and we tippy-toe down to our seats, which was in there, and over here, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. We finally get there, and I sit down, and they said, "William Daniels." And I thought, oh my God, what'll I say? I didn't know. I had no idea that my name was going to be called. And so I got up there and I said, you know, I almost didn't make it here. And that got a big laugh. And I said, these two little old ladies, which is what happened, that they picked me up and took me home. And I told them, you know, that I said thank you, and they rode along and said, we know who you are, can't we take you? And I told them that old story. Later, the press said, did you make up that? I said, how could I make up that story, for God's sake? Because it was the truth. And it was a great help in having something to say what just happened. You know, that was a great help.
So St. Elsewhere ran for 6 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the legacy of that show?
What do you mean by the legacy?
Well, what impact do you think it had on television, the shows that followed it?
Oh, gee, honey, I never actually thought about that, or whether it had a legacy or whether there were copies of it. I don't know. I'm afraid I can't answer that.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about Knight Rider already, but one question I wanted to ask was, you did that and St. Elsewhere at the same time. So how did you balance doing all that work?
Well, I was doing St. Elsewhere, so I think I told you I just went over and laid down some lines for the producer, so that when it sold, they said it was the same network, they'd work it out. So I could do St. Elsewhere, which took precedent as far as I was concerned, and then I'd go in on a day that I wasn't working, and they worked that out, and I'd go in and I'd knock this off of this car that spoke, which I thought was ridiculous, but turned out to be. We were over in Greece, and I was in a bar talking to the bartender who happened to speak English, and then suddenly I heard at the door, Kit, I got the car, goes, Kit, come up north, everything free for you, come with me. He just went nuts, you know, and that was in Greece. So you don't know the way these shows are shown, and some of the mail you get is amazing. You know, it's just incredible.
And you didn't even get credit on that show, right?
No, I didn't want any. You know, I said I'll do it, but I don't want credit. I thought I could sneak in with it, you know, and nobody would know. I didn't think it had a chance anyway. And then there it goes, and it didn't matter. People kind of knew you were doing it anyway. So
in 1993, you started playing Mr. George Feeney on Boy Meets World. How did that come about?
I'm trying to think.
I understand it was a role that you took and then maybe turned down, that you...
Oh, now you remind me. Okay, yes. He had a funny name, and so and he was a teacher, and I didn't know the people involved who were going to produce this, and so I turned it down, because this guy with a funny name, I didn't want to make fun of teachers. I just didn't. They're too important, and they're too underpaid, and all of that. So I turned it down, and he called me in, would you please come in and see me? So I came in and saw him.
Michael Jacobs?
Michael Jacobs. And I said, he said, you turned it down. I said, I don't want to make fun of a teacher. And he said, well, let me tell you how I wrote this. I had a teacher in high school who was a mentor of mine, and I have a great deal of respect for him, and that's what this part is going to be. It's going to be handled with a great deal of respect. And I said, oh, well, okay. I didn't think it would work anyway, but it did. And suddenly there was Mr. Feeney, even with the funny name. So it turned out that he did exactly that, and that part I have had so much mail about how important it was on their lives. Teachers and students who took it all in and followed a lot of the advice, and it was really gratifying to get that kind of mail, and I got a lot of it too. So that was very pleasant, and it turned out to be a very good experience because he handled it with great respect. He didn't make fun of him or make a fool of him or anything like that, and it worked.
Describe Mr. Feeney and talk about a bit about his relationship with his students.
Well, say that again.
Describe the character of Mr. Feeney and what his relationship was like with
Well,
his students.
Well, he was kind of an uptight guy, and he I think, sort of, he was half and half. I mean, half of him was difficult to deal with, and then there was another half of him that was okay. And the final line in the show, when he says, "Do good, work hard," or whatever that was, and then when they all left the classroom, he says, "I love you all," and that showed another side of him which hadn't been seen that much of, if at all, and it was very pleasant to do. And I can't think of anything else. It had a lot in it that's my own character, really, so it was kind of fit me like a glove.
What do you think you brought from your own character to the part? What was similar?
Well, first of all, what you do is you don't try to do a character. You do yourself, because you are very right for the character. And what you have to be able to do, which is hard enough, is to bring you, the real you, to the character. And not do an accent or do theatrical conception or anything. Don't characterize or anything, just you. And that's hard enough to do. And so that's what I would usually concentrate on doing.
Talk about your relationship with the young actors on the set.
I stayed away from them. They had a very kind of, and this is perfectly right for them. They're young, and they had a great, it was like they were at a ball, they were having a party, and their parents were there, and so I'd hide in my dressing room, working on my lines and so forth. They were very lackadaisical, and they should have been. They were young, and that was that. So I wouldn't come out until they really were ready for me. Otherwise, I don't know, I wouldn't be there. I was afraid that I would resent them not taking it seriously, which was silly. So it was better that I stayed in my dressing room. And I never, ever made a point of never, ever touching their performance with any advice or anything like that. That was not my job. There'd be a lot of actors, I think, who would make a mistake and try to teach them something that they wanted them to do. I didn't do any of that. Never gave them a note, nothing. I dealt with what they gave me. And but I had to stay in my dressing room a lot. out of the party that they had.
Talk about Ben Savage, who played Corey Matthews.
Well, he's a great kid. I mean, he was just, he was, what, 9 or 10 or something like that when he started. And when we finished, he drove up in a truck. And I thought, oh my God, he grew up in this part. A truck, he drove a truck onto the set, onto the lot. He literally grew up in the part, and he was always a good kid. He had very good parents who were supportive of him, but were there, but silently there. They didn't intrude into any of it, and that worked very well, both for he and for
Danielle.
No.
Will Friedle?
The other guy.
Oh, for Fred Savage. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Fred.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 No, that isn't the guy.
What?
Who's the other fellow? Who
On
was
the-
his
On the show?
roommate?
Oh, Ryder Strong.
Yes, Ryder Strong, who had a big part. And I watched them grow up in this thing, you know, until I think, did Ryder get married on the show?
Yes.
That was like the last season, and he got married. And I think I did the marrying or something like that.
That was on Girl Meets
Of
World. Yeah.
Girl Meets World.
Yeah. Hmm.
And talk about Danielle Fishel, who played Topanga Lawrence.
She's a nice little girl. I didn't socialize with her or anything like that. She was there, and she was very well behaved. And I don't know what to say. I thought she was very good in the part. And again, she grew up in the part. You know, I hit them at that stage where they go from a kid until a young adult, and that was always interesting to watch. And the way they turned out, you know, nothing spoiled these kids. They were really terrific.
So Mr. Feeney followed the kids from grade school to high school, and then even managed to get a job when they went to college.
Yes, all of that.
What
It
did you-
just went on and on and on.
What
And
did you think of that?
I went from teacher to principal or something like that. Yeah, we had to do something like that. As they grew up, they were in those teenage years, and as I say, they came with their parents, and then they came in trucks or cars or whatever they were driving, having passed the driver's test. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite episode or moment on the show?
You know, I don't want to make anything up, and I can't come up with anything. It's like with me, as soon as I hear print, it's out of my mind. It's been that way for a long time because I've done a lot. But I hear print, okay, now I'm on to the next thing. And that's the way it was with that show. You know, it was just, you got over it, you did it, and you did it, and you liked it, and they liked it, and so we all went home happy. You know?
You talked about that final moment, and Mr. Feeney was the
Yes.
last person on screen
I
and to
know,
speak.
I know. It was a lovely moment,
Yeah.
yes, where they finally leave because he'd been so strict and you know, demanding and tough with some of them and all of that, and then suddenly they all leave and he says, "I love you all." And it was a very nice moment. It really was.
What was it like shooting that? Was it emotional for you to shoot that?
Yes, it was, because it was over, and it was the end of 6 seasons, and yeah, it was emotional. I didn't do anything about it, but I mean, I wasn't going to break down in tears or anything like that, but it was an emotional moment. You can play it without tears. Yeah, it was a nice moment.
Why do you think that show has resonated with fans?
I know. Well, it was kind of honest show, you know, about these kids growing up and the teachers. They never went for big laughs or belittled characters to get a laugh or anything like that. It was treated with a great, just as he said, with great respect. And I always appreciated that, and that's the way it went all the way. So that to this day, I'm happy to say I was part of it.
And in 2014, you appeared on Girl Meets World.
A couple of episodes at the beginning, I think, to get it started and to establish the fact to remind them of the other show, yeah, I did 2 or 3 episodes.
The last one.
The last one, right.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to be back with your old castmates who are now
Oh, God,
grown-ups?
I know. It was. I don't know how to. I don't know how to
Ben.
describe it. What?
Ask him about Ben.
What about Ben? Working with Ben again as a grown man.
Oh, I know. And I remember I went up a couple of times, with the lines, and he'd come over and say, "Don't worry about it," and he'd treat me, like we'll do it over, and and he took over, and I got a great kick out of that, yeah, it was very pleasant. It really was.
That's great.
The whole thing was very pleasant. I've been a lucky fellow.
Well, you're a talented fellow, so
Yeah.
that helps, right? We wanted to talk a little bit about the craft of acting. So, what do you like about acting?
That I'm able to do it, for one thing. I didn't always appreciate it. I was put into the business, not so much acting. I was a song and dance team with my sisters. But when I got into the acting, I was lucky to land in Life with Father, and as I started as an assistant stage manager, and then went into the second oldest, and then the oldest, and from the second oldest to the oldest, the 2 leads, Howard Lindsay and Dorothy Stickney, came back into the play after having been out of it for a year. So I was there when they were doing their brush up, and so he kind of took me under his wing and said, "This is," because I was now going to be an actor, not an assistant stage manager. And he explained a few things to me that have been important to me ever since. And let's see. One of them was, he said, "Bill, not because Russell and I wrote this, but we have more laughs in this show than we want. And we don't want to send them home tired. We want to send them home like they haven't laughed enough." So he said, "This is the way a laugh goes. It goes up, and it plateaus. Now it starts down, and that's where I want you to stop it, so that they never really, they have to stop laughing to hear the next line." And he said, "Just look in my eyes on that line, because it's a big laugh, and that will tell you when to speak." His eyes. And it did. And I'm a 15-year-old kid or something like that. But every night, I just look at him, and his eyes would release me. I don't know how that happened. I really don't. Or whether I'm just imagining it. I don't think I am. But he taught me a lot, but mostly off-stage discipline, how serious you take the role, as he did. And without him knowing it, he was a great mentor of mine, because I watched what he did, and I saw how he pulled himself together. He had a soft voice, and he'd get in his dressing room, and he'd place his voice with exercises that got it higher and higher and more prominent, and it was going to be like that, oh God, in the beginning, and a whole another voice. And that was interesting to me, to see how he'd work on that, the placement of his voice in his dressing room as he got ready to go on. Things like that was very important.
You have such a famous voice.
I do.
Did that impact the way your voice developed?
I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not copying his voice, no. No, I just think this is my voice, actually. I guess it's fortunate that it carries. I don't have to yell. In fact, I remember in A Little Night Music, the girl who had been there, and I replaced Len Cariou, and she had this scene with me on a bench, and she mentioned that you don't seem, she said, as soon as you came into the show and we started the scene, I realized that I was yelling. And I said, well, you don't really have to. If you enunciate clearly, it'll carry to the back of the house without you doing it. And that's the way I did it, I think my voice, I guess, carries normally, but yelling is not good.
What's the first thing you do when you get a script? Do you mark it up? Do you do research? What's your process when you get a script?
When I get a script, I say, how the hell am I supposed to do that? What are they? That's not. Well, let's see. Maybe I can do it. And I criticize it. I criticize this, I criticize that. I'm very negative about the whole process. But finally I come to accept it. And okay, I'll do it that way if that's what they want. I'm not good at judging scripts. Would you say, Bonnie? I don't think so. No.
That's a no for
all I
me.
see is problems. How am I supposed to do that? Oh, wow, that doesn't make any sense. Or this and that and the other thing. And of course, it all works. It all works. And that started in the zoo story, and it went on from there.
You're often referred to as a character actor.
Yeah.
What does that description mean to you, and do you
It means
like
I'm
it?
not a leading man. And I'd rather not be a leading man, to tell you the truth. I think the character actors get more interesting parts, to tell you the truth. I've been very happy with that. I'm too short to be a leading man. No, I like being a character actor. It's got more stuff in it.
In 1999, you became the president of the Screen Actors Guild.
Yes.
So, how did that come about?
There was about 3 or 4 guys in a group called Membership First, right?
They
And
were called Performers Alliance.
Performance Alliance. They asked me to come over to Arts Deli here one day because they were looking for an actor with a certain name value and so forth, and maybe you could tell us who, in your experience, you have met. So I'm trying to think of these guys, and they got me there. And then they started telling me the problems that the current administration was having, and they were very specific about it all. And I suddenly found myself saying, well, how about me? I don't know if I could get elected. They said, you'd get elected in a minute. And then I realized, I didn't realize then, I realized much later that they had it all planned out that way. And I ran, and then I got it, and spent 2 years as the president, and one of the years was a 6-month strike, which was difficult, but nevertheless very satisfying in the results that we got on commercials, and it required a lot of going to New York and things like that. But I was glad I did it, but I didn't want to do another 2 years, no. It was too stressful.
What were the circumstances of that strike, and how was it resolved?
The circumstances were we were under a poor contract, and producers always had another contract that was terrible, cut out residuals, put it on the table. They didn't have any intention of insisting on it, but they put it on the table as something to bounce off of. And so we had to ignore that, and we had to we had to insist on something that was doable, reasonable. The residuals were poor. What else, Bonnie?
It's the commercial strike.
This is the commercial strike.
Yeah, the commercials. And we had the strike, and it required going to New York a number of times because that's where the producers were. And finally, we held out for what we wanted, and we got some really good things. For instance, an actor on screen, himself on screen with a commercial, would get $1,200 for 13 weeks, I believe. Well, if it was a successful commercial, it'd be used thousands of times, and he would not work again for God knows how long. So we held out and went from 1,200 to 2,400, which was a 100% increase. That made more sense. So that was one of the things we got. We also got recognition in, what do they call it, on the internet? No. I forget what we call it. We weren't getting any recognition in, oh boy, I can't remember right now.
Yeah, it's okay.
I guess I'm getting tired.
Yeah, we're drawing near to the end
Okay.
of
Yeah.
this part. We just wanted to talk about one of your more recent roles, which was on Grey's Anatomy, where you worked with Sandra Oh on
Oh,
Grey's
yes.
Anatomy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, let me think about it. First of all,
You played a doctor named Dr. Mark Craig. Sorry, Dr. Craig Thomas.
Great.
Which
Dr.
seemed
what?
to Dr. Craig Thomas was your character's name on
Oh.
Grey's Anatomy, which
well,
seems
that
like a
was
nod.
kind of an inside joke, right?
Yeah.
First of all, Sandra Oh was very approachable, very nice, and we got along extremely well. And we had scenes together, mostly with her. I think most of my work was with her, and it went very well, and it was very easy, and all of that. And at the end of it, I think they had a big birthday cake for me, a huge cake, and it was fun. I enjoyed it, and she's terrific. Yeah, she really is.
Great.
She's a good actress too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we just had a few questions to sum up.
Okay.
What advice would you give to an aspiring actor?
Perform wherever you can. If it's a living room, do it. If it's a stage at school, do it. Wherever you can, do your acting, and don't have, there's a step to each, Don't say, I won't do anything unless it's on Broadway. No. Whether it's summer stock or whether it's in a friend's house, just do it and get that experience, as much experience as you can get. Any available time to get on the boards, as they used to say, you take it and do it. Whether you like the company or maybe not even the part, just do it. That'll be over with, and you have it under your belt. And you need a lot of that exposure, practice, all of that. And that's what I tell them.
What's your proudest career achievement?
Sticking with it, probably. No, achievement. I don't think of it as achievements. I mean, I guess getting certain awards, like the Clarence Derwent Award off Broadway, or the Emmys. She got 2, I've got 2. That's kind of nice recognition. Although I hate getting up on the stage and having to think of something to say, but yeah, those recognition points are very pleasant and for getting to do something that you love to do anyway, you know. Yeah.
Do you have any career regrets?
Career regrets. What was the thing with Bob Fosse? Was that? No.
Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. What did I do? I turned it down?
We came out here.
Yeah.
So this was the Broadway.
Yes, and I had come off a long run in, what was it, Bonnie?
1776.
In 1776. And Fosse wanted me to meet him about Chicago, and I had been in this tough part for 2 years, and I just wanted to get out here because I'd been out here before, and it was nice, and the work is easier here, and so I didn't go in and take the meeting with him. Probably, if I hadn't been that long in 1776, I probably would have gone in and been happy. But then Jerry did it, you know, and he was terrific, Jerry Orbach, and that's the way it goes, you know.
Yeah. And then one last question that we ask every interviewee is, how would you like to be remembered?
With kindness. I don't know how. Maybe having seen a performance that they remember, you know, and kind of like, and I've had some mail that said, you know, it meant something to their lives. That's always a pleasure to receive something like that. And of course, the main thing is the applause. You get the applause. Bonnie said, you know, you've never known how to take a bow. My attitude was funny. I felt like, okay, I did it. I did the whole thing. That's my job for tonight, and that's all I've got. Thank you, and off, you know, a little dip of my head instead of, you know, some actors just love it. They bathe in the applause, and they smile, and they take deep bows and all of that stuff. I don't do that. I can't do that. It's just not me.
Excellent. Well, you deserve deep bows every day. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back with you and Bonnie together.
Oh, God, there's more?
Yes,
There's
there's
more.
more. I told you it was a long day.